Good morning, brothers and sisters in Christ. Do we trust in God? Do we have hope in God? Do we take courage in God? Those are the things we're going to study in today's Word from God. Stay tuned. Good morning. Today we're going to be in chapter 27 of the book of Acts. We will have had 13 lessons after the next lesson. This is the 12th lesson we have had in the book of Acts. I must move quickly today in that we have a full 44 verses that we are going to cover in the book of Acts, chapter 27. And last week, Dr. Lyons had us in chapter 22. Therefore, we have moved from 22 to 27, and that's a big move, my friends, a big, big move with regard to what's happened. Quickly, I would finish chapter 26 with a few verses, and then we'll get into our lesson in 27. But Paul has been moving toward Europe, and he is moving the gospel message out with assistance from a lot of his cohorts and friends that are evangelists with him, and they are spreading the word of Jesus throughout the European continent, and they're beginning to move in that area. So now he's come back to Jerusalem, and things have gone bad. That's the chapters 23, 24, 25, and 26. But I want you to, one thing I want to leave with you as we quickly get out of 26 and go into 27. All of this, everything that Paul is doing, is under the leadership of God, and Jesus are moving him where they want him. And my friends, where they want him is they truly, God and Jesus together as one, want Paul to give the gospel message in front of Israelites, in front of Gentiles, in front of kings, and high people in different areas of the world. And he did that in 23, 24, 25, and 26. He preaches the gospel message, the good news of Jesus, to two governors and to a king named Agrippa in Israel. And that gets him in trouble. And he says, I am a Roman citizen, therefore I want to go to Rome and be tried in front of Caesar. Paul is wanting to preach the gospel message to Caesar and to his household and to his generals, to his legion commanders, to his cohorts, to his centurions, all the people he can. That's the main reason he came back to Jerusalem, in spite of all the fact that his friends did not want him to come back because they knew that the Jews were out to get him. So let's finish in chapter 26 and then get into 27, which is our main lesson for the day. I'm going to read you from verses 30 to the end of the chapter 26. The king rose. This is Agrippa I told you about. The king rose, and with him the governor, that is a man by the name of Festus. Agrippa is the last of the Herod family. He is finally, we're going to be through with the Herod family that has been anti everything there is to do with Christianity. They ran certain areas of Israel, and they tried to get along with the Israelites because they didn't want Rome breathing down their neck, but they gave a lot of grief to the Christian word. And so this governor, verse 30, and 26 says, the king rose, and with him the governor and Bernice. Bernice is his wife, but really he's his sister also. So it's a mess. It's just not a good thing. And Felix before him was another governor that he had his problems. He was the governor after Pontius Pilate, if you remember him, in front of Jesus. Why, this is the atmosphere that Paul has been preaching in. You know what, my friends? Paul absolutely gave the gospel message, and he gave an invitation. He gave an invitation for them to follow Jesus. And they said, you got to be crazy. You got to be crazy, Paul. Do you think in one time I'm meeting with you, I'm gonna believe your message that you're giving to me? But that's what Paul is doing, is moving out the way God intended it to happen. The way God wanted it to happen is what Paul is doing. He's going to Rome because he wants to preach in Rome. He wants to preach the good news. All right. Verse 31, they left the room, that is, the governor and the king. They're up in Caesarea, and they now leave the room, and they go and talk. And here's what they say. They left the room, and while talking one with one another, they said, this man is not doing anything that deserves death or punishment. The Jews wanted him killed. In fact, there was a hit notice out on Paul by 40 men. If you were to read 23 through 26, 40 men had taken a vow. We're not going to drink and we're not going to eat until we kill Paul. Well, the Roman soldiers didn't want that because Paul is a Roman citizen, so they send 476 soldiers, that is 200 fighting soldiers on the ground, 200 spearmen, and 70 horsemen, cavalry warriors, and then six in his entourage that are going up to Caesarea from Jerusalem just to protect Paul, so to keep him from getting killed by these 40 men that have taken a vow to say they're going to kill him. So they say that there's nothing that deserves death or punishment. Agrippa said to Festus, verse 32, and then we'll get into the lesson, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. Why does he appeal to Caesar? Please get it in your mind, folks, that he's appealing to Caesar because he wants to preach the good news to Caesar. And Caesar is now a title. There were two original Caesars that their names were Caesar, but this is now a title. And the fellow he's going to be preaching to is a guy by the name of Nero, and you've heard of him. So let's get into the lesson today. The lesson is a matter of trust is the name of this lesson. A matter of trust. But it's more than trust. It is trust and hope in God. It is courage in God that I would say this lesson is. So 3 key words that I want you to keep in your mind as we go through this lesson. Trust, hope, and courage. And let's study the word together. Now, this is, our church once a year has a stewardship message. And this is the stewardship message. Stewardship is our servantness to God, how we serve God. And our preacher, our head pastor in our church, always says, I ask you to do 3 things, folks. The Lord would be pleased if you'll do 3 things. And these 3 things are give an hour to worship, give an hour to Bible study, and give an hour of service to your Lord. Whatever it is, whether it's making phone calls, whether it's going seeing people in the hospital, whether it's calling friends, whether it's whatever it is, those are the 3 things. That's the minimum of the 3 things he asks people to do. And our church does pretty well at that. We could do a better job. We could certainly do a better job, but we do a pretty good job of it. So this is really, excuse me, you will see that this is going to be our stewardship message for the year. We only do it once a year. A matter of trust. And what does trust mean? I looked it up and I asked my dear wife, I always sound these things out with her before I teach a lesson. What does trust mean to you? And she gave me an excellent answer. It's not the answer that I got out of the dictionary, but it satisfied me. And trust is confidence in or assured trust on another. Confidence in another or assured trust in another. And who is this another? You know who it's going to be. It is God. It is Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus and believing that. That's where the trust comes from. And you're going to see that in this lesson. This is a very involved lesson. And we will have, there's a trip that's going to be involved, and it's a very dangerous trip. It's a circuitous trip. That is, it takes almost 2,000 miles to get to where he's going. He's going to Rome to preach to Caesar. He's under arrest, you know that, but he is going to Rome, and there's no Queen Mary that you can get on and take direct out of Caesarea and catch a ship and go directly to Rome. That would be about a 1,400 mile trip. But in fact, the way Paul is going to do it, in this route where you have to catch ship after ship after ship. There's not ocean liners. I mean, these are all working ships. These are ships that have grain or have some kind of commodity they can trade or sell and things like that. So that's the ship that he would be in from time to time. He transfers ships a total of 3 times before he ends up getting to Rome. But so with that said, for the past 11 weeks, we have journeyed with Paul in the latter half of the book of Acts. There are 28 chapters. Dr. Lyons will have the 28th chapter next week. I'm in 27 today. So stay tuned for that final chapter, as well as please pay attention. And you will see a map on the screen that shows the trip that he's going to be taking. It is in great detail. There's not a thing that you couldn't understand with regard to the trip that he's taking. So, but it's more than a trip, my friends. It's a matter of trust. It's a matter of hope in God. It's a matter of courage as we move forward with God. So that's where we are. So along the way, Paul truly had to work within a matter of trust. He had to trust. First of all, he trusted Jesus. There's no question about that. You can see it time after time after time. But he also trusted in relationships. Think of all the lessons we've had together between Dr. Lyons and myself in the book of Acts, when he trusted in Barnabas to go with him on the first missionary journey, when he trusted in John Mark later in some of the epistles. John Mark plays a big role. Paul leaves him to do things that he has confidence in that will get done properly. That's a matter of trust. And all of this is Paul's trust in the Lord, and these relationship trusts also in the Lord. Well, we could think of Silas, who's in his second missionary journey. You remember that story. You could think of Timothy. You could think of Apollos, who was an eloquent preacher, could speak the word, perhaps was not mature in the word, but did understand the word very well with regard to preaching it, just the eloquence of his preaching. Aquila and Priscilla, who were good friends of Paul's, they were tent makers with him, and they were stallions and stalwarts working for the Lord. But trust is what I'm trying to emphasize to you. Luke, who follows, in fact, Luke is going to be on this ocean trip with Paul this time. So be sure that you put him in your relationship trust too. I think of Titus. I've just finished a study of Titus in another Bible study. In fact, Dr. Lyons and I both teach in that other Bible study, and it's in Titus right now. And again, another man that Paul put a lot of trust in, and the trust was there because God was behind that trust. So Paul also had to trust in kindness and hospitality of strangers. Paul didn't have a lot of money. Paul may have come from a wealthy family, we think, but as he's out venturing around, he's depending on relationships for people to take care of him and give him a job. Aquila and Priscilla were tent makers, and Paul was a good tent maker. You can tell in the action of the Gospels that Paul could make money and did an efficient job in tent making. So this is a relationship thing with the trust that I'm trying to talk to you about right now. So his walk with Jesus, let me tie a bow around that part of it, was a matter of trust. His relationship with others was a matter of trust. His tent making business was a matter of trust. And his financial situation was a matter of trust. He trusted in the Lord. My question to you is, are you mature enough and do you have enough faith that you can trust in the Lord too? I am learning how to do that. It's getting easier for me to trust in the Lord. I slow down and trust Him. Where I used to trust my business acumen or my background or whatever it was would be the way I did it. I've learned after the scars of life, you learn to trust in the Lord. And it's not always going to come out the way that I want it to, but I have one thing that I will defend to my death, and I promise you that would be a defense to my death, is if I say a prayer and I say it in the name of Jesus, that prayer is heard by Jesus up in heaven, standing on the side of God, and Jesus will present that to God, and then it may be no. They may say, no, Jim, this is not what we're going to do. No, it's not time to do it. Or yes, I want to do what you're saying, and I believe it's for the good of the gospel, for the good of the kingdom. So, a matter of trust. Today we're going to look at the most adventurous of all of his trips. It almost reads like a dime novel. They were a dime back when I was a boy. I don't know what they are today. I don't even know if you can get a comic book today. I don't even know what it is, but it's something about the Black Panther, and I read the headlines in the paper today that said it's grossed 192 million in America, and it's grossed 170 million or something like that over in the other foreign countries. So it's already a big deal. It's a myth. It is a nothing but a fictional story. This is not fiction, my friends. This is the real thing that happened, and the minute details you're going to read in these scriptures are so important to see that God just knows exactly what he wants to say in this road book of life that we have called the Bible. So with that said, we'll be looking at a very adventuresome. There will be storms, there will be circumstances that are beyond everyone's control, but believe me, it's a matter of trust for Paul, and it's a matter of trust for me in this life too, and I hope it becomes a matter of trust for you in your life as well. Acts 27 verse 1. I'm going to be reading a lot of scripture here, so follow me closely. Get your book, get your Bible out. Acts 27 verse 1. When it was decided that this we is Dr. Luke is writing the book of Acts, remember that. So when it was decided that we would sail for Italy, that is, they're going to Rome, they proceeded to deliver Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort. A cohort is a subdivision of a legion. A legion was 6,000 men, and there is a legion commander. If you went back and looked at 23 through 26, you would see some of your Bibles will call him the commander. Some of them will call him the chief captain. That is a legion commander that has 6,000 men under his command, and then there are 10 cohorts under that legion commander, and then there are centurions with 100 men under them. So they're headed with a centurion he's got Paul in custody, and he's part of the Augustan cohort, and that's a very famous, and I won't get into the details of that, but believe me, these are warriors. These guys are nothing to mess with. They're like they'd be like our SEAL teams and our Green Berets and things like that. So his name was Julian. Verse 2. And embarking in an Adramyttian ship, that is a region that's up by Troas, up in Turkey, and that is a region that was there. It's a ship that's from embarking in an Adramyttian ship. These are coastal ships that haul a lot of grain, is what I'm told. So they're deep draft. That is, they have a big bottom to them, and they carry a lot of grain. Which was about to sail to the regions along the coast of Asia. We put out to sea accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica. Now he is a follower of Jesus, and a follower of Paul's, and he is mentioned several times in other gospels that have to do with Paul. So he is following as well as Dr. Luke. They're going. He's from Macedonia of Thessalonica. The next day we put out in Sidon. That is, we stopped at Sidon, which is up in Syria, and today you'd call that Lebanon, but that's still on the coast where they've left Israel, and that's not too far up. That's probably 70 or 80 miles is all that is, but they obviously had a stop there inside and that they needed to unload or load some more grain or whatever it was, the commodity they were using. And Julius, this is the name of the centurion. This is a Roman soldier who knows nothing about Jesus, but he is getting an earful. He is hearing the word, I am sure. And I see something in Julius. I see that he has a tender heart. And the Lord is going to be able to work into that heart with his Holy Spirit, it looks to me like. And it doesn't say that, but I think Julius, his eyes are opening and he's hearing and seeing because he's got a tender heart. And we're going to see that in this lesson. And Julius treated Paul with consideration. This is from the Lord's word. And allowed him to go to his friends and receive care. Verse 4. From there we put out to sea, that is, they're sailing again, and sailed under the shelter of Cyprus. You'll find that on your map. You see the island of Cyprus. They're sailing under that. They're trying to stay out from all the winds. This is a coastal ship, not made for the open seas. So, because the winds which were contrary. Verse 5. When we had sailed through the sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia. Now remember, Paul, this is very familiar territory from Paul. Paul was from that region. His home was Tarsus is right in the middle of that region. So as they sail by, I'm sure Paul is looking out over the ship and seeing his home area. They're hugging the coast, my friends. So we landed at Myra in Lucia, verse 6. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship. An Alexandrian ship would be Alexandria, Egypt. Egypt at that time was the main seller of wheat all over the world, and they shipped wheat all over the world. So this is an Alexandrian ship. I'm quite certain that this is full of wheat, maybe some barley or something like that, but primarily wheat, and they would sell it throughout the world. Centurion found an Alexandrian ship. Remember, there's no ocean liner that just goes directly over to Rome, so you gotta do what you can. But history tells me also that the centurion, all he had to do was say, we are going to Rome, and they are given free passage and first time passage. In other words, everybody else has to get bumped off if there's any passengers on there, because the centurion took precedent over the regular civilians going on the ship. Sailing for Italy. This ship is going to Italy. And they put us aboard. Verse 7. When we had sailed slowly for a good many days, and with difficulty, that is, the winds are not giving them favor, and the winds are giving them trouble, and they're having a hard time maneuvering, and you've got to be very careful. If there's one thing I've learned in this study, is the Greek islands and the Turkish islands are very treacherous. For example, over in Greece, there are over 2,000 islands. Now, they're not all inhabited. I'm not saying they're all inhabited, but there's 2,000 islands. It is a macro archipelago. I mean, normally an archipelago would be 3 or 4 islands that are separate islands, but they're in one little congealed area. And so this is a macro archipelago, and Turkey has the same thing, but they don't have 2,000 of them. They have somewhat less than that. So there's a lot of difficulty there. For many days, and with difficulty, they arrived off of Cnidus, Cnidus, and that's right over by, remember, Paul stopped in Miletus and called for the Ephesian elders to come down, Ephesus elders to come down to Miletus and have a talk with him before he went back to Jerusalem. Well, this is where they stopped. So they arrived off of this city, since the wind did not permit them to go further. The wind is going against them, obviously. So we sailed under the shelter of Crete, and you'll find again the big island of Crete on your map. Off of Salome, verse 8. And with difficulty sailing past it, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lasea, Lasea. They stayed there for quite a while. We don't know how long they were there, but we do know they stayed there for a while, because the Bible tells us they stayed there for a while. It was not a pleasure cruise for Paul. You know that. He's a prisoner. But he's going with a mission. And you know what? I just see Paul every day getting up and saying, let's go, gang, let's go. We're going to get a chance to really, really preach the word. So I see that as nothing but positive all the way, even though he's headed to a tough situation. Even as a prisoner on a ship headed to Rome, Paul trusted the sovereignty of God, even in what might have appeared as the silence of God. It may appear they're having bad winds, things are not going exactly right. It may appear, remember what I said about prayers and about God hearing our prayers and Jesus hearing our prayers. There is no question, if you ask it right to God, they will review your prayer every time you say one. And I love that, and I stand on that claim. So there is no doubt that if Paul had had his choice, he would have not chosen to be a prisoner, especially a prisoner on a ship that was headed in a direction under his control. Now, he knew very clearly that God said, you're going to go to Rome and you're going to preach in front of Caesar, and you're going to be in front of Caesar. And I think he was, even though the Bible does not tell me, there is not a verse that I can find that says he went in front of Nero and pleaded his case. But I believe that he did, because Jesus told him he was going to do that. All right. And yet it's all a matter of trust, my friends. You know that. It's all trust that Paul is working under. However, some of the people that are around him are not working under that same trust. You're going to hear the words hope. You're going to hear somehow. I mean, somehow we're going to take care of this thing. What is somehow? I mean, we'll find that in just a minute. So it's still a matter of trust. Paul was a prisoner on a ship in a storm, headed to a destination he didn't choose. But God chose that destination. Let me say it again. God chose that destination. Acts 27, verse 9. When considerable time had passed, remember I had said they stayed in Fair Havens for a time that we don't know how long it was. It looks like, because we can tie in certain festivals, certain religious holidays, things like that, to dates that tell us it looks like it took 7 to 8 months to make this trip that shouldn't have taken that long at all. But remember, there's a lot of people. There's 200. You'll find there's 276 people on this ship, and this is an opportunity for him to witness to them also. So when considerable time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous, since even the fast was already over. This fast there's only one fasting holiday, and that is what we call Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement, a very religious probably the highest of all for the Jews, the highest holiday. It's not a holiday, it is a fasting day. It is a day of no work. It is a day to look, and you do it once a year, and that is to get you in good shape with God, to where you were walking with God for the next year. So that's what the Day of Atonement was, or what we call Yom Kippur now. So we know that, and that always happens sometime around the end of September to the middle of October, depending on the calendar they were using and how they set it up. But that's where we get part of the date of how long it took them to get there. Paul began to admonish them. That is, he's now beginning to say something, and he's not admonishing them in a terrible way. He's not jumping all over them. He is admonishing them. I know has some connotation of strong, and I think he probably was saying strong. And here's what he's going to say, verse 10. And Paul said to them, "Men, I perceive that the voyage will certainly be with damage and great loss, not only of the cargo in the ship, but also of our lives." Verse 11, "But the centurion," that's Julian, that is his Roman centurion that's in charge. "The centurion was not persuaded by the pilot but the centurion was more persuaded by the pilot and the captain of the ship than by what was being said by Paul. Now here's little Paul, beat up, probably scarred all over his body, and he's a small man in stature is what is implied to me. And here is an experienced pilot of the ship, the captain of the ship, and the centurion who's in charge of 100 men. So they don't have the trust and faith that Paul has. And so he's given them an admonishment. The admonishment is, I see that there's going to be trouble here, men. Now, Paul is not just dreaming this up. He's not just pulling something out of his head. You'll see in just a minute what's really happening here. So, verse 12, because the harbor was not suitable for wintering, the majority reached a decision, that is, these leaders against Paul, they reached a decision to put out to sea from here. And here's the big word that I really want to zero in on. If somehow, what is somehow? I mean, do you want, if you and I are let's say we're in a combat zone, and all of a sudden our officer or our top sergeant or whatever it is says, well, if somehow we can reach this place, I'm not wanting somehow. I'm wanting surety. I'm wanting hope. I'm wanting trust. I'm wanting some facts. And but these fellows are saying, this is their words, if somehow they could reach Phoenix, which is the next town, next city, a harbor of Crete, they could safely harbor in there, facing southwest and northwest, they could spend the winter there. It's getting cold, the seas are getting rougher, and ice is going to be a problem before long, and they are going to have to winter somewhere. So, while still a prisoner, Paul was looking for a position. He took a position of leadership. He wasn't looking for it. It wasn't his choice, but he has to stand up. He's standing up for the Lord, and he knows that where his trust is, and so he speaks. It wasn't given to him, this leadership position. He took it. Paul gave them advice, and they ignored it, my friends. They've ignored it. They kept moving, even if it was in desperation. Somehow, they're going to move. Let's do something, is what they're saying to themselves. And boy, I don't like that, but that's what they decided. Verse 14 of 27. When a moderate south wind came up, supposing that they had attained their purpose, that is, they think now they've got a purpose. Supposing, not just absolutely, not absolute, not this is the way it's going to be. It will happen. They are supposing that the purpose of the wind was to be able to help them. They weighed anchor and began sailing along Crete, close inshore. They're hugging the shore. But before the ship was caught, very long, they reached down from the land a violent wind. There reached down from the land a violent wind called a euro-aquilo. That is a word that I had to look up and see what it really is. That's two words. It's Latin and Greek both. Part of the word is, euro and aquilo are Latin and Greek word, which means a northeaster, a big wind coming out of the northeast. They're headed west. You can see that. And the wind would be to the back of them. And that wind can get really treacherous. So, but before very long, they rushed down from the land a violent wind called a euro-aquilo. Verse 15, and when the ship was caught in it and could not face the wind, they gave way to it and let ourselves be driven along. That is, they're now at the mercy of the wind and the sails. They no longer have control of the ship. They have just completely made decisions that they had no trust in anything other than themselves. So it's a helpless feeling, and I'm sure Paul was really wanting to talk to them about this. The good news is that this isn't the end of the story. God doesn't give up on them. God has a mission, and Paul doesn't give up on God. Remember, it's a matter of trust. Even in the midst of a violent windstorm or circumstances beyond our control. And a lot of times, if you've never had a circumstance beyond your control, then you don't have a lot of gray hair in your head yet, or things have just watch out. There's going to be things that are going to be beyond your control. Where does your hope come from? Where does your trust come from? Where does your courage come from? Do you pray about it? Do you talk to God about it? This point of faith in God's mercy is still valid, although you are the one who made the choices to put the boat in the water when advised otherwise. They were told to not, by Paul, don't go, but they did go ahead and go. Now we go to 16, verse 16. Running under the shelter of a small island called Claudia, we were scarcely able to get the ship's boat under control. Verse 17. After they had hoisted it up, that is the sails, they are now letting the wind catch them and just move them where the wind wants to move them. They used supporting cables in undergirding the ship. That is, they have actually had to go down under the bottom of the ship and come back up with cables and tie them tight and hold the wood together. That's how bad it is. And fearing that they might run aground on the shallows of Syrtis, these are the sands that have been marked by navigational maps. They are still there today. The sands are, and they are a treacherous area, and the navigators of the ships need to be very careful about them. They let down the sea anchor. A sea anchor to a sailor is a very important item. What I see in these wooden ships that were at the time that Rome was in power, it's about a 6-foot wide piece of wood, and it's about 30 feet tall. And at the bottom of it, they either put the anchor marble or lead weights down to the bottom of it, and then they tie ropes up to the top of that 6-foot piece of wood, and that's 30 feet long. And they put barrels up on the top of that, and it keeps the sea anchor from sinking to the bottom of the ocean, but it gives them stability and slows them down to where they're not going as fast as they would with this nor'easter that's pushing them. And in this way, let themselves be driven along. Verse 18, the next day, as we were being violently storm-tossed, they began to jettison the cargo. They're getting to where the cargo they wanted out of there want to lighten up the ship. Verse 19, and on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. Now they're really throwing away things that are vital to them. Verse 20, since neither the sun nor the stars appeared for many days, and in no small storm was assailing them, from then on all hope, H-O-P-E, hope, one of the words I started with, where is the hope? Who is the hope in? What is hope? That is a very important word, and it is a word that we need to understand, and I sang a song in my Sunday school class Sunday, and I won't try to sing it for you. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. So that's where the hope really is. But hope to them was a different thing. They're just hoping. They don't know who they're hoping to, but they're hoping. All hope that they would be saved was gradually abandoned. They were seeing a bad situation. They knew that it was a bad situation. The hope, folks, is where it always has been. The hope is in the Lord. I hope you see that, and I hope you trust that. Trust, hope, courage. Those are the words that we're using as emphasis today. Verse 21, when they had gone a long time without food, then Paul stood up in their midst and said, here's Paul's leadership again. Men, you ought to have followed my advice and not to have set sail from Crete and incurred damage and loss. I told you so is what he's saying. Now, he's not saying it in a vindictive way. He's telling them that I predicted this, and you're going to learn how I predicted it in the next few verses. So this is Paul talking. But you should have followed my advice is what he's trying to say. Verse 22. Here's an important verse. Yet now I urge you to keep up your courage. Keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only the ship. We're going to lose the ship, but there's going to be no loss of life. Verse 23. For this very night, an angel of the God to whom I belong, and to whom I serve, stood before me, verse 24, saying, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. You're going to Rome. We're going to get you to Rome. God will get you to Rome. And the angel is speaking in behalf of God to Paul, and he's now telling the men this, the passengers on the boat, the workers on the boat, the soldiers on the boat. God has granted you all, those who are sailing with you, therefore keep up your courage. And what is courage? I again asked my dear wife, and she gave me a great answer for that, but courage is the ability to do something that frightens me. It's strength in the face of pain or grief. Where does that strength and courage come from? I believe as I have matured, my courage today comes from Jesus, and I stand on that also. Verse 27. But when on the 14th night came, 14 nights they've been going through this. They've not had any sleep. They've not had anything to eat. They've had a tough time for 14 nights. That's a long time, folks. As they were being driven about in the Adriatic Sea, and you can find the Adriatic Sea on our map that we're providing here. There's two seas that come together, the Aegean Sea and the Adriatic. If you look at the boot of Italy, the map of Italy, you see coming down between Italy and Turkey, well, really Macedonia and that area, you will find the Adriatic Sea. So look at that. It's just so clear. God has made it so clear to us what's going on here. We were driven about in the Adriatic Sea, and these two seas come together, and they cause a turbulence where the Aegean Sea and the Adriatic Sea come out into the Mediterranean, and that causes more problems for a person that can't control their ship. So it's just a bad deal. On the 14 nights they've been doing this, and they about midnight the sailors began to surmise that they were approaching some land. This land happens to be a country that we will call Malta, is what we will call it. And it wasn't called Malta at that time, but it's now Malta. And if you're a World War II history buff, you'll know that, man, oh man, did they go through some clobbers and some fights on Malta. Verse 28. They took soundings. This is the sailors. They took soundings and found that it to be, they're looking for bottom. They're looking for the bottom. It'd be 20 fathoms. That's 120 feet deep. And a little farther, they took another sounding and found it to be 15 fathoms. That's 90 feet deep. Verse 29, fearing that we might run aground somewhere on the rocks, they cast out 4 anchors from the stern and wished for daybreak. They're wishing now. They've lost everything. I mean, there's no trust, there's no courage, there's no hope. They're wishing and wished for daybreak. They're just hoping daybreak will come. Verse 30, but as the sailors were trying to escape from the ship and had let down the ship's boat, that is a lifeboat, into the sea, on the pretense of intending to lay out anchors from the bow. They're trying to hide it because they know that their centurion's not going to let them get by with that. Verse 31, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men remain in the ship, you yourselves cannot be saved. Verse 32, then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it fall away. Now comes a little bit of trust. They've cut away all the ropes. There's no escape. There's no lifeboats now. They are at the mercy of this thing called trust, and that's where I would want to be if I were in that situation, particularly when God has told me you're headed to Rome and you're going to preach in front of Caesar. In the next verses, Paul noted, and I'm going to have to skip them. There are just too many verses here to really go through, but 33 to 38, Paul tells them about in the midst of great fear. They've not eaten for 14 days. And he feeds them. He asks them to eat. He breaks bread and he prays. He blesses the bread. He prays to God, to the real God, Jesus. And they hear it, and they all ate. There were, and 37 tells us there were 276 on that ship. Verse 39. When day came, they could not recognize the land, but they did observe a bay with a beach, and they resolved to drive the ship onto it if they could. This is a very famous, if you go on Malta today, and I have not been on Malta, it is a very popular tourist attraction. And if you're there, they will show you St. Paul's Bay, where they think Paul swam into shore. And then that'll take up in chapter 28, but we'll be ending here just very shortly. So when day had come and they did not recognize the land, they did observe a bay. That's St. Paul's Bay, it's called that today, where they beach, and they resolved to drive the ship onto it if they could. Verse 40, and casting off the anchors, they took all the anchors out. They left them in the sea. In the same time, they were loosening the ropes on the rudders. The rudders now are running free. There's no guidance whatsoever. The rudders were useless anyway, but they've now loosened the ropes on them that are turning the ship, and they're now at the mercy of where the ship wants to go. And hoisting the foresail to the wind, they were headed for the beach. Verse 41, but striking a reef where the two seas met, that is where the Aegean and the Adriatic come together, they ran the vessel aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable. But the stern began to be broken up by the force of the waves. So the ship is falling apart now, and they are now having a tough time with it. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners. Now, why do they want to kill the prisoners? Because a Roman soldier, if he had me incarcerated and I were to escape, then the Roman soldier would take my place, and they would kill the Roman soldier. So they wanted to kill him. So none of them could swim away and escape. But the centurion, this Julian, and I told you earlier that I see a kind and soft heart in Julian, wanting to bring Paul safely through, kept them from their intention and commanded those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to the land. Verse 44, and the rest should follow, some in planks, some on planks, and other on various things from the ship. And so it happened that they were brought safely to land. And that is the end of our session. Chapter 28, we'll pick it up and move forward with him getting to Rome, is where we'll be, and then we'll be through with the book of Acts. So this is a stewardship message, and it is, do you trust? Do you trust when you give your tithe? Do you trust in the three things that I talked to you about that our pastor asked us to do? Give 1 hour to Bible study, 1 hour to Sunday school, and 1 hour of service to the Lord. May God bless you.